But I think Downing Street is feeling a little bit calmed by the return to quite a few schools in England and Wales today. The whole process carries on over a few days. They stagger their return in many of these schools. And at Cabinet today, ministers were told that they should take some encouragement from what happened in Leicester, where the schools actually opened last week, and where, of course, there had been a serious lockdown. And there, the attendance has actually been pretty impressive. The council today confirming that it was 91%, quite close to the attendance record that is getting reported in Scotland, where, of course, schools have already gone back. In the House of Commons today, which was back, of course, the Education Secretary talked about that, but he also talked about how he may well have to move next summer's exams back a bit. That could end up being the least of his worries, or certainly there'll be plenty of them in front of that. And he alluded to that when he said there might well need to be an assessment of exactly just how much pupils have fallen behind in the 6 months that they haven't been going to school. That might not be a national assessment, it could be within schools, but nonetheless a lot of work going on there. The return to school, of course, as you're alluding there, was always meant to, in Boris Johnson's eyes, liberate parents to go back to the workplace. That does not appear to be happening in anything like the numbers that Boris Johnson was hoping for when he appealed for that at the beginning of August. And you get a flavour of how sticky that return to work is. We know it's sticky in the private sector, sticky in the public sector as well. When you hear so many stories about how ministers have been trying to urge their departments to get people back in, there's pressure from the centre to get workers back at their desks. But this letter, which I've just had handed to me, written on Thursday from the Health and Safety Executive to the Department for Work and Pensions, this accuses them, not in one of the old offices in Whitehall, but in a swish modern one in Leeds, of breaching material breaches of the Health and Safety at Work Act, not managing to stay within COVID restrictions, and maybe being far too ambitious in thinking they could get 50% of their workforce back. So many problems still there. As we said, schools in England and Wales, many of them starting back again today, and of course Parliament starting back today after the summer break. Here's how it went. Rush hour this morning on commuter routes into London. No sign of the great return to the office desk. Boris Johnson told Cabinet this morning was already happening.
People are going back to the office in huge numbers across our country, and quite right too. And
the government's hoping opening up schools in England and Wales after the summer break will bring workers back into offices to support town centres, shops and cafes. Transport for London reported passenger numbers up around 7% on last week, but still down 50 to 70% on normal.
So students, however, they will be required to wear face masks in transitions and during unstructured time in communal spaces.
Many of the schools just opened, like this one, are having a few training days for the staff before pupils come in. But others have fully opened, like this sixth form college in London.
It feels weird now. I'm actually talking to people, not through a screen. You know, like, I'm back to how some semblance of normality like it was.
You're not next to people anymore. You've got a screen literally just before your teacher. You've got face masks on. It feels weird.
Like, with all the social distancing and like, all the new rules the college is implementing, it makes me feel like more safe in a way than I do outside.
The Education Secretary today said the opening of all schools was a milestone that should be properly appreciated. He also repeated his apology to students who've gone through uncertainty as the government U-turned on how to assess A-level and GCSE results without exams.
This situation has, I know, caused a great deal of stress and uncertainty, and I'm deeply sorry that those who have borne the brunt of it have been students themselves. I can only apologise to them again for this.
Just one U-turn in a summer of them, which the Prime Minister alluded to when he spoke to the Cabinet.
In the last few months, we've been sailing into the teeth of a gale. No question. And sometimes in the teeth of a gale, it's necessary. I'm no great nautical expert, but it's necessary to tack here and there in response to the facts as they change, as the winds change. But we have been going steadily in the direction, in the course that we set out on, and we have not been blown off that course.
The Cabinet was meeting in socially distanced format in the Foreign Office. The Defence Secretary had to apologise for breaching the 1 metre plus rules when he shook hands with a colleague on the way to Cabinet. Some Tory MPs spent the summer wincing at the government U-turns and longing for COVID restrictions to be lifted.
May I just speak on behalf of older people? I'm one. I think I'm the oldest person here, 70, still kicking just. And what I can say to him is older people don't want to be patronised. They're very well aware of their own health needs. They can be trusted to isolate if they have to. We don't want to have this thing that the man from Whitehall knows best. The man from Whitehall doesn't know best, especially as he changes his mind every 2 minutes. So can we get back to being a proper Conservative government and trusting the people and let the people decide how to look after their own health?
I understand where my right honourable friend is coming from. The goal is to have as little intervention, as targeted intervention as possible, subject to keeping the virus under control.
Number 10 said it would take a fortnight to know how many pupils had returned to the reopened schools. Some indicators suggest attendance could be around 90%, but spikes in COVID infections could quickly change that.
Well, earlier I spoke to the leading Conservative backbench MP, Sir Charles Walker, and I began by asking him what grade he'd give the government, given the U-turns over primary schools opening, face masks and exams over the summer.
Well, I think anybody would say there's room for improvement, and we've now got the start of the September session, the autumn session, moving into Christmas, and I think things are going to be better. I think the government already today has hit the ground running. It's going to set out a roadmap to what the new normal looks like, and I think that's what people want, it's what my constituents want, what colleagues want, is the confidence that there is a plan to get this country up and running again, to get the economy moving and get things back to a good position, or as good as we can get them given the current challenges.
40% of schools in England have reopened today. A fraction of people are back in the office despite the government's pleas. Why do you think so many people are failing to heed the government's pleas to get back to school and the office?
Well, it's for each individual to make a decision. I think the best decision people can make is get back to work, get the economy up and running again. We're a first world economy. We have first world public services, and the only way you can keep funding those public services is by generating the wealth to do it.
But they're not doing that, are they? Why is that?
But more fundamentally, I think we all owe it to young people to get back to work, to get back into the classroom, to get back lecturing. Young people are the least touched by this disease, but they're paying the highest price. They've suffered at school, at university, the job market. They're being asked to work from home in cramped conditions. So actually, collectively as a society, I think we owe it to young people to play our part, to get back to work and create the opportunities and the normality that these young people need to thrive and achieve their potential.
Don't you think that a lot of the reluctance to get back into schools and offices might be because the promised world-beating test and trace system is anything but at the moment? In fact, it's missed its targets for 9 weeks in a row.
Do you know, but what we've seen actually is that this virus is under control. And yes, you're right, let's not talk about world-beating. Let's just have something that works, and test and tracing is up and running.
It's not working as well as it should at the moment, is it?
And it can get better, but that is not a legitimate excuse really for people not to go back to the office, not to go back to work, not to send their children to school. As I said, children are virtually untouched by this illness, and actually most healthy adults have very little to worry about. So come on, let's get a sense of perspective and understand the personal risks to us. I'm 52, the personal risk to me is minimal, and I'm willing to quantify that risk and return to work.
OK, finally, you know, because you were very close to Theresa May, just how gruelling it is being Prime Minister. Do you think Boris Johnson is finding it a rather tougher job than he imagined?
Of course it's a tough job. Nobody imagined on December the 12th, I think it was, when the general election was, that we would end up in this position a few months later, come March. So of course it's grueling and grinding, but that's what you sign up for when you become Prime Minister. You sign up for the unexpected, the bad times as much as the good times, and there's always going to be more bad times than good times. Just ask Blair, Brown and Cameron about that.
Do you think he's got the stamina for it for the full term, though?
I do believe he has the stamina for it. I have utter confidence in faith in Boris Johnson. I really do, and I want to see him level with the nation, be honest with the nation, look it in the eye and say it is all of our duty to actually do our bit for our communities and society, and at the forefront of that is actually getting on with our lives and going back to work.
Charles Walker, thanks very much. Well, today also marked the first day of the government's so-called mission control setup in Westminster. The Prime Minister's top advisers have been moved into a new office area in 70 Whitehall. The changes made by Boris Johnson's chief advisor, Dominic Cummings, mean special advisers are grouped together according to their policy areas. Meanwhile, Simon Case was also today named as the UK's new top civil servant. The 41-year-old was previously private secretary to Prince William. He'll replace Sir Mark Sedwill, one of 5 senior civil servants to leave their role under Boris Johnson. So what do these changes tell us about how the Prime Minister is changing the way government is run? I'm joined now by Damien Green, who is a Cabinet Minister under Theresa May. Damien Green, Dominic Cummings promised that a hard rain would fall on Whitehall. When you think about the fact that the Ofqual boss, the most senior official in the Education Department have already gone, are you expecting that hard rain to accelerate under the new Cabinet Secretary?
I don't think the Cabinet Secretary change will make that much difference in that regard. Simon Case is a good operator, has worked for a number of Prime Ministers. He worked in the private office of David Cameron and Theresa May, so he clearly knows how the centre of government works and can get on with a wide range of different personalities. So clearly he's a good pick for the job. I think it's possible to overestimate the importance of moving people from one room to another room. It's actually the quality of the decisions they're making and the quality of the information they're getting to make those decisions that actually matters.
Being dumped on when, according to people like Sir Charles Walker, you know, the government themselves have made some missteps in the form of ministers.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear. There's a very loud helicopter here.
I was just saying, is it right that officials are getting dumped on? Shouldn't ministers also be taking responsibility? You know, the Education Secretary, for starters.
Well, in the end, all decisions are made by ministers in conjunction with officials. I think that in all circumstances like this, the most important thing is that you end up with the right decisions. And I mean, you refer back to
but
the
why hasn't
A-level.
why hasn't the Education Secretary gone in conjunction with his officials, as you put it?
Well, because he's got a job to do, a very important job to do, and he's doing, of getting people back to school, of setting the conditions so that children can go back into school in the way that all sensible people want them to, because we've now made it safe for them to do so, and it's good for them, not just educationally, but in terms of mental health to do so. So I want to see the Education Secretary get on with that, and that's what he's doing.
So who should get the blame then, in your view, for the lack of a world-beating test and trace system at the moment?
Well, the test and trace system has been set up from scratch very, very quickly and is getting better by the week. And you can see that in the practicalities, that originally we had to have a whole national lockdown with all the economic problems that caused. We've now got the test and trace system good enough that we can have local lockdowns when there are particular incidences of it. And as the test and trace system gets better over the weeks, I hope that those lockdowns can become ever more localised, because that's the way we will be able to carry on with as near normal life as possible,
right,
if the pandemic persists.
And the Prime Minister is trying to carry on with the normal business of government. He says he's not going to be blown off course by the pandemic. Of course, that pandemic has to get paid for, though. How would you view if the government drops its target to spend 0.7% of national wealth on overseas aid?
Oh, I would absolutely oppose dropping the overseas aid target. I think it's one of the good things that Britain does. I think it's the right thing to do morally. I think it's good for our reputation around the world. So I would be disappointed. I'd oppose it, because you'd need to pass legislation to drop the target, and I would oppose that. And I would be very, very surprised if that happened in the end. I suspect the government won't go down that route.
Well, I mean, we're talking about how to pay for the pandemic, and clearly there's a period of economic turmoil ahead. Do you think it is the right thing to leave or consider leaving the EU without a trade deal in place at the end of the year, or would you oppose that too?
Well, I'm always said and maintain the view that it would be much better to leave with a trade deal, but you can't mandate a deal. You have to have both sides agreeing to it, and clearly the negotiations are at the final stages, and therefore the stickiest phases. But of course it would be preferable for us to leave with a deal, but as I say, it's not entirely in our hands.
So you could live with crashing out. You said it'd be preferable. You could live with crashing out.
I haven't got any choice. If the European Union doesn't come up with an acceptable offer, or if the two sides don't meet, then it's not in the control of me or indeed the British Parliament or even the British government as to whether we have a deal or not. To have any kind of deal, you need both sides to cooperate. I think it would be in the interest not just of Britain but of the rest of the EU to come to a trade deal. We don't want to see tariffs, we don't want to see quotas or anything like that. So I hope that that's what happens.
Damian Green, thanks very much.